going on, guys? I'm Tim Kelly, joined by Anthony SanFilippo. This is Phillies Stoplight for May 22nd. The Phillies just finished off a four-game sweep of the Rockies, and as bad as the Rockies are, and they may end up being the worst team in baseball history, the Phillies have not had good success in Coors Field, and they've now won 5 games in a row since Jose Alvarado's suspension. And granted, the Rockies are bad, the Pirates are really bad, but you faced Paul Skeens in there once. You went to a stadium where you traditionally have not fared well, and you made it out of that with 5 straight wins. So I do think that's something of a statement, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a statement. I don't want to put too much on it. I mean, obviously, beating Skeens was a big deal. We already talked about that. That was the big Mick Abel game early in the season, or earlier this week. And the Rockies are in fact, I'm going to say it. They're going to finish with the worst record in the history of the game. I mean, they're 8-42. Right. So, but this is what good teams are supposed to do. You're supposed to take these teams that you're far better than, and you're supposed to beat them to a pulp. You're not supposed to, it's okay to lose one here and there to those kinds of teams, but you don't want to split this series in Colorado. So they went out there and they just did what they had to do against this Rockies team. And yeah, they've won 5 in a row since the Alvarado suspension, 7 in a row overall. And it's funny, Tim, a month ago today, the Phillies were 5 games out of first place and 500. Now they are 12 games over 500 and in first place by 2 games over the Mets. It's amazing how different a month can make things.
Well, and it's just a reminder when you give these opinions in April about, I don't know, I might be worried about Bryce Harper, how stupid you're going to end up looking a few weeks later. And a lot of the same people doing that are also saying it about Juan Soto now, which is ridiculous and not Phillies related, but just something that's been on my
Well,
mind right
well,
now.
yeah, you know what happens, Tim, and they're going to end up moving the goalposts, right? So
Right.
when all the people who were saying that they were unsure about the team or unsure about a player like Bryce Harper a month ago are now going to sit there after all this success and go, well, still have to do it in October. And it's like, well, of course they still have to do it in October, but you have to get to October first, and that's what is the thing that drives me the most crazy. It's like, well, yeah, this team failed us in October in the past. I get it, but if you're in October, it means that you had a pretty darn good season, right? So you got to have that season first and be a good enough team to get to October before you worry about failure in October.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, it's a 6 month season. You're going to be miserable if your whole basis of the season is what's going to happen in October. We'll find out in October. And it's fair to have reservations, as we've said, about how things are going to play out in October. But this is a team that's going to be in October. They're one of the better teams in baseball. They may not be the best, but they're in the mix. So enjoy the ride while you're on it. Today's show, though, really want to break from the normal. That the Phillies are now through 50 games of this season, and I want to kind of just go through some awards and different honors we're going to give out through those first 50 games with whatever it is, 112 games remaining in the season. The first is MVP. Anthony and I have not talked about these at all. So, Anthony, anyone on the Phillies, hitter, pitcher, whatever, who's your MVP?
I don't think it could be anybody other than Kyle Schwarber through the first 50 games. The guy has been sensational in whatever role he's been in, whether it's been batting leadoff, batting cleanup, batting third, hitting against left-handed pitching, hitting against right-hand pitching. He's tied for the major league lead in home runs with 17. He's been the Phillies' best offensive player throughout the whole season. I still think it's just the one game, right, that he has not reached base in the first game of that doubleheader against the Cardinals a little over a week ago. Otherwise, he's been on base in every game this season. Really just been, and he's the leader in the clubhouse too. There's no doubt about it. So like every facet of what a team needs a most valuable player to be, Kyle Schwarber has been that for the Phillies this year. And I don't think, I mean, there's a couple other guys you could look at and say, if you have to pick somebody other than Kyle Schwarber, you could, one or two other guys. But I don't think that there's anybody else that deserves the MVP of the first 50 games for the Phillies other than Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesus Luzardo is worth a mention,
Yeah.
but to me, you're right. It is absolutely Kyle Schwarber. What he's done seems to just continue to get better. And I think one of the things that is a byproduct of Shohei Ohtani breaking the glass ceiling of a full-time DH winning MVP for the first time. He had won it previously, but it was when he was also pitching. Last year, he won it just as a DH, and I get he steals bases, all that, but we've realized you can be a really valuable player as a DH. In hindsight, like it's insane. David Ortiz never won an MVP, or Edgar Martinez, or some of these other guys. And I'm not saying Kyle Schwarber is going to be the league MVP, but is he in the discussion right now? Absolutely. Like we kind of look at it in this way that, well, if you don't play a position, you can't be nearly as valuable. You're super replaceable. Nothing about what Kyle Schwarber is doing is replaceable. And I think, especially if you're a guy that's not a very good fielder, you are more valuable just being a DH and just focusing on that. And oftentimes, I guess we make too much of such and such guy's a clubhouse guy, but I did a story on Pattison this week asking the Phillies, what does that actually mean to you? What makes a good clubhouse guy? And 4 of the 6 guys I spoke to went out of their way to cite Kyle Schwarber. So that gives you an idea of how impressive of a season he's had and how important of a figure he is. And Phillies are going to have to probably get uncomfortable if they expect to retain him, because they're going to be even more uncomfortable if they don't end up retaining him.
Oh, correct. I mean, they're going to have to pay probably a little bit more than they were willing to pay, but I think that they, see the kind of production he's giving them this year, and they're going to look at that and say, "All right, fine, let's open the pocketbook a little bit more." But you talk about full-time DH, Tim. You forget he played some left field this year. He's played some
Yeah,
left field.
yeah, he has. I mean, he's not a good
He's not
left fielder.
Shohei Ohtani. He's played the field.
That's why he's the DH. But yes, it is helpful if he can go out there 15 to 20 times this year,
Yes.
and occasionally Castellanos or Harper or JT or whoever can be the DH. Yeah, that is valuable. And the first base thing from spring training hasn't materialized, but I give him props for wanting to do this, because he's certainly a good enough hitter now that he could basically do what Rafael Devers is doing. And I don't even disagree with Rafael Devers' mindset necessarily, but he could say, I'm putting my glove away. He hasn't done that, and good for him on that. It's just kind of another thing to hang in his cap. Now, if Schwarber's the MVP, let's do one for most impressive, excluding Schwarber, because really every single one of these categories, at least the positive ones we're going to do here, you could give to Schwarber. Beyond him, who has been most impressive to you?
Well, I mean, I think that this is where you have already mentioned Luzardo, right? I mean, I think that that's where he kind of fits into the equation, because he really has been the most impressive player. Because you didn't expect this. You didn't expect the guy to be, atop the WAR leaderboard in the National League amongst pitchers, and there's Jesus Luzardo, and you didn't expect him to be, dominant the way he is. I mean, you expected a mid-rotation guy, who, as long as you cross your fingers and hope he stayed healthy, and then say, okay, well, that makes the rotation that much better. But the reality of it is that he's been as good as any pitcher in baseball this year as a starter, and not just for a handful of starts. We're talking 10 starts for the season so far, and Jesus Luzardo has been that good, and so I think he's been the most impressive player on the team, just because you probably didn't expect it to be this good, and he has been this good for the first 50 games.
I'm not particularly shocked that he's pitching at like an all-star level, because prior to being hurt last year, he had some stretches in Miami where he pitched like that. So based off of how he looked in spring training and just being healthy, I expected him to come in and be like another number two. It's kind of why I was surprised at how little of a reaction there was to his trade. But he's not only at an all-star level so far, and it's very early, too early for this to matter, but he's pitching at a Cy Young level. So super impressive from him. I'm going to go off the beaten path here a little bit, because yeah, obviously Luzardo and Schwarber would be the answers here if you're just going by the book. I'm going to say Jordan Romano. He had a nightmarish start. Probably, if you did an approval rating on him in the end of April from Phillies fans, it would probably be under 5%. And he's responded with one of the best months that I can recall from a Phillies reliever. And certainly it's taken on added importance with Jose Alvarado going away with the suspension. But it was important before that, because they didn't have a right-handed reliever that was pitching particularly well. What Jordan Romano's done just mentally has to have been an extremely difficult process to, in a matter of a month, win a lot of people back over. And it was never that he wasn't working hard. I can tell you, and Anthony can tell you from being in the clubhouse, he's like as positive a guy as you'll ever meet. So he was never someone that was negative. He answered all the questions. But in your mind, going through what he went through in April, there has to be part of you, especially after a season where you were hurt a lot of last year, wondering, do I just not have it anymore? Turns out he more than has it.
Yeah, and not only that, Tim, and I say this all the time. Like I hate when people give stats for a guy and say, well, if you just take this game out or that game out or this few games out, then their numbers are even more impressive. The only time I think it can come into play is when you're talking about a relief pitcher, right? And it's more than just the last month. It actually goes back a little bit further. If you actually go back to April 10th, right? If you take out that one game against the Marlins where he blew up in the ninth inning, gave up 6 hits, 6 runs, and only 2/3 of an inning, take that one horrible game out, which was when everybody wanted to fire him into the sun, right? You take that out of the mix. He's now gone 14. I'm sorry, 13 and 2/3 innings. This is would be in his last 14 outings. Okay, and he will have given up only 6 hits and 1 earned run, and I believe it's 3 walks and has 15 strikeouts. That's pretty darn consistent, pretty darn solid. The guy's been, and that ERA would be, what's that, 1 earned run in 14 innings? I mean, you're talking less than like 0.7, somewhere in that range. Like, it's really, really good. And so I kind of agree with you that when you're talking about guys impressing, maybe he hasn't been the most impressive over the course of 50 games, but certainly over the course of the last 35 or so, he's right up there with Luzardo and Schwarber as amongst the most impressive guys.
Well, and I would imagine that has to be pretty powerful if you're one of his teammates who are all pretty much younger relievers than him, and you see what he's overcome early in the season. Whether it's this season, 5 years from now, you have something now to look back on and say, I saw a guy have about the worst start to a tenure with a team you could possibly have, and he rebounded from it. And it's a long season. He could come out his next outing and give up 10 runs, but he looks really good right now. So it's impressive. I would also add a quick note that Trey Turner, what he's done in terms of maybe giving up a little bit of the power to make contact and kind of do what the Phillies want of him. Now, he hasn't had as much success stealing bases as he has typically in the past. I would assume that'll correct itself over the course of a season. But to have taken to heart what Rob Thompson said about, I want you to have a 380 on base percentage. I don't care about home runs. I want you to get on base and wreak havoc. And he's done that. I think that's really impressive too, because he's certainly someone with the financial security and the clout that could have said, no, I'm good. I'm going to do what I've been doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure how happy he is about it. As I wrote that story a couple of weeks ago where he was as, he was as open and honest about how he felt about the way he was hitting, and yet he's continued to do it. And you're right. The one thing that he hasn't done is steal the bases. And here's one thing I got to wonder about, Tim. Is it possible that they're not asking him to run as much because he's got two left-handed hitters behind him, and if you leave that hole open on that first base side, kind of gives them a little bit more of an opportunity to get hits and get him to third base on a single to right field?
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly possible. One
Yeah.
of the realities, though, he's been thrown out 5 times in 16 attempts this year. So he just hasn't. 2 years ago, he was, I believe, 30 for 30 on something like that on stolen bases. His rate has always been good. It hasn't been to this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, true. But I look, right now, what they have going on at the top of that lineup is working. And whether it's against left-handers and he's leading off, or it's against right-handers and he's batting second, whatever they have going right now, it's absolutely working. They shouldn't change it until it starts to not work. And yeah, and Harper and Schwarber batting behind him both have been great lately, especially Harper. And I think that as he just keeps doing what the Phillies have asked him to do, they're going to continue to score runs.
So we've done a few positive. Let's do one negative. Who's been the most disappointing Philly to you to this point?
Well, I think this is another easy one, unfortunately, and I think it's a guy who's been really good for a long time for this organization, and right now it just hasn't been, and that's Aaron Nola. You get off to a 1-6 start to the season and an ERA of 6.15, I think it is, or 6.16. That's just not good. And I know that there was a stretch in there where he started to look better. It was like a 4 game stretch. It was like, okay, two decent starts, two really good starts. And then tries to pitch through an ankle injury and gets, destroyed and ends up on the IL. You don't know, if it was just an IL stint out of convenience. And I'm not saying that he's not hurt. I'm sure that he does have an ankle injury, but that putting him on the IL was just, the right time. The timing was right considering he wasn't pitching well. Or if it was really, really impacting the way he was pitching. So we'll find out when he comes back. I have a feeling that he'll be back the end of the Milwaukee series next weekend. I think that that's probably when you are going to see Aaron Nola pitch again, and we'll get an opportunity to see, hey, is he back to being Aaron Nola? Has he gotten through this ankle thing, or he's still struggling. He's still, dealing with the same problems he's dealt with for most of the first part of the season, and then you got to wonder exactly where he fits into the role on that starting rotation.
Yeah, certainly Aaron Nola, I think, is the clear answer here. I'm going to go because you have such a good starting rotation, even with him struggling, though. I'm going to say Jose Alvarado is the most disappointing,
Hmm.
not because of how he pitched, but because of the situation he's put himself and put his team in. Whether it was he was trying to get an unfair advantage and that's why he didn't check with the Phillies, or he was using the weight loss drug as they expected and had an ingredient that made him test positive, really doesn't matter. There's no excuse. That's almost worse to if this really was just a mistake because it's negligent. All you had to do is snap a picture and send it to the Phillies, and they could have told you one way or another. The fact that he didn't do that, he cost himself a lot of money, both in terms of the suspension and maybe in terms of his option getting picked up next year. And he's not going to be eligible for the playoffs. And I wrote earlier this week on Patterson, I think that's kind of a stupid rule. And this not just applies to Jose Alvarado, it also applies to Jerks and Profar. The idea that you're suspended, you're allowed to come back, pitch in games. Seemingly, you're treated like your suspension is over, but then in the playoffs, you can't pitch again. I kind of feel like it's punishing a guy twice. But at the same time, it's like if you don't want to do it, then just don't test positive. So I see both sides there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that is a major disappointment, and because it hurts the organization in other ways, Tim. Because now they have to get creative with how they replace him in the bullpen, not just for 80 games, but for potentially in the postseason. And you have to make a determination on, are we converting a starter into a reliever? Or do we have to trade a prospect that maybe we didn't want to trade to add a reliever, into that bullpen later this summer? There's a lot of things that impact the Phillies as an organization by his decision and his negligence. I think that those are the things that are really disappointing about that. But I got to give you credit for coming up with Alvarado for most disappointing, because normally when we do the mailbag, you get to answer all the questions first and I got to come up with something different. So it's nice to be the one who gets to answer first for once, and you have to come up with something different.
I actually kind of like going second because then I like if I go first and I don't say the obvious one, then it looks like I'm trying to be too smart. But in this format, I think it works out. As far as the Phillies had 8 All-Stars last year. Now, Ranger Suarez and Zach Wheeler didn't end up going, but it was a record. I don't think they're going to have 8 again this year. But let's look at just a few guys that could be All-Stars. I think Bryce Harper's going to have a tough time just because first base is a tough position. He's playing well enough that in theory he could, with a few good weeks, put himself in the race, but he's going to have to get above Pete Alonso and Freddie Freeman, among others. So maybe this isn't a year he's an all-star. I think Trey Turner's got a case, but the three that I feel pretty certain right now are going to be all-stars are Jesus Luzardo, Zach Wheeler, and Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah, I think that's probably it, for the season. I mean, you never know. Things could happen, and somebody else could end up in that mix. believe it or not, like, is there anybody that's good at third base in the National League this year? And not to say that Alec Boehm deserves to go to the All Star game, but it's a pretty weak position in Major League Baseball. I don't know. I think that there's a possibilities of other guys getting added after the fact. Starting pitchers are always in a situation, Tim, where they get named, but then they don't appear, and then somebody replaces them. Is it possible that that somebody else gets added, like a Sanchez or even Ranger, if he keeps pitching the way he's pitched another great game today, 6 2/3, doesn't allow a run. If they keep pitching that way, is it possible that one of those guys gets added? Sure, but I think that the three that you named are probably the guarantees that are going to make the. And if let's put it this way, if those three guys don't get named, if any one of those three guys don't get named to the All-Star team, then that is a joke. To
Or it
steal a
means
line
that
from a former host of a radio show, a joke. That's what it is. And it would be if those guys don't end up there.
you would be a dope as a voter if you don't vote for
Yeah.
those three. Um, I would say Jesus Lazar, like there's this new thing now in naming starting pitchers for the All-Star game that like it has to mean more than just who's been the best pitcher. And if that's the case, Lazardo won't be the starter. But if it's about just the merit of who's been the best in the first half, he might get it. If it's about who's been like the best pitcher in this era and deserves it, maybe Zach Wheeler gets it. I think there's a real chance it's Paul Skeens for the second year in a row, and it's hard for me to argue if that's the case. But uh, with Zach Wheeler and Kyle Schwarber, I think both of them are on the outside looking in most likely, but they, in terms of the Hall of Fame after their career, but they are both guys that very much are still writing that story and could get in. And as much as all-star game appearances are not a good way to determine that, will say when I look at someone's baseball reference page and they have like less than 6 all-star game appearances, I'm kind of like, it feels like not enough. Zach Wheeler, amazingly, has only been an all-star twice, and Kyle Schwarber is in the same boat. So these are guys that probably need to rack up a few more to help themselves in the future for that case, and this would give each of them a third one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right when you start looking at those guys over the course of their careers. Wheeler is just a model of consistency. And the thing of it is with him is that he's always, pitching great and one of the best pitchers in the league. And then there's always a few other guys who are making names for themselves by having slightly better years. Maybe, some guys have them in the first half and then fall off. And Wheeler just keeps plugging along. Actually, Wheeler tends to get better as year goes on. Or somebody has like a Chris Sale has that, monster year that he had last year, and everybody gives him his flowers and says, yeah, you're the Cy Young, and Zach Wheeler, great season, but you're second, right? And so I think that Zach Wheeler always falls into that category, but yet he's there consistently year in and year out. In fact, if you look at his numbers right now, I honestly think they're more impressive than even Luzardo, and everybody talks about Luzardo. Zach Wheeler is a couple of Johan Rojas stupid plays in center field away from having an ERA under 2, right? I mean, that's really where he's at. He's leads the league in WHIP. He leads the league in strikeout to walk ratio. I mean, he's as good a pitcher as there is in Major League Baseball right now.
Yeah, and I know he said he's only going to pitch out this contract. I think we'll see at the end of it. I'm not saying he doesn't believe that now, but I have a feeling someone will come to him with 20 plus million a year, and that's really hard to turn down, especially if you think it can help cement your Hall of Fame case potentially.
Tim, if he's in 3 years, if he's still pitching at this high of a level, it's going to be more. Somebody's going to offer him more than $25 million a
Well,
year.
and you get 2 years at least.
Yes, and I think that when you start looking at that kind of money, like, why would you turn it down if you're Zach Wheeler to just come back and keep doing it for another year or two after this contract runs out? Like, it would be, to me, I don't know how you can walk away from that kind of coin, but we'll see when that time comes.
For sure. Now, the final thing I want to get to is who do you think is the biggest X factor in the second half the next 112, whatever I said, remaining games this season.
Math is a good subject for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
112 plus 50 is 162. Yes.
Yeah.
The biggest X factor is a guy that's not even here, and it's going to be Andrew Painter. I think Andrew Painter is going to come up here sometime in the next month or so, and all of a sudden he's going to create a situation, whether it's because he's a very good starter or they find out that he's going to, maybe they want to manage his innings and use him in a different way, whether it's towards the end of the season in a relief role. We'll see, but I think that he is going to be the X factor that helps determine and shape what this Phillies pitching staff as a whole will look like after the trade deadline in the second half of the season. So I think that is the biggest X factor for the Phillies as they go from this point forward.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I'll say, like, building off of that, he's going to have a big effect on what happens to Ranger Suarez, as is, does Ranger Suarez just stay healthy? I know he's in a contract year. He did say when he first came back, like, you could tell he doesn't want to go to the bullpen, but he said if it was best for the team, he'd consider it. Well, that was before Jose Alvarado was not going to be eligible for the postseason. So I don't think there's much question that come October, it's going to be what's best for the team. My question is, what about on August 15th, if it's what's best for the team, will he make that transition? But I certainly think he is someone that, building off of whatever happens with Painter, he's going to be a huge X factor as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And the only other name that I even thought about when we were trying to put this one together is another guy who I don't think gets enough recognition, and he's a part-time player, so I don't think it's the biggest X factor. But can he be an X factor? And that's Edmundo Sosa. I mean, keep in mind, what we're seeing out of him this year a little bit that's different than in the past. Last year, when he filled in for Trey Turner, he was great for a month, one of the Phillies' better players for a month. But then they tried to keep him in the lineup, and he kind of fell off, got exposed a little bit, and just ended up being a nice role player, a nice bench player, but nothing more than that. Now he's kind of moved into a little bit different of a role, Tim, and that is being the right-handed platoon at second base. And the Phillies won't call it that; they won't say it's a platoon, but it is that. That's exactly what it is right now. He's playing against lefties, and Bryson Stott's playing against righties, and I think that teams have always wanted to line up left-handed pitching against the Phillies. And when you look at the way Schwarber's been hitting lefties and Harper has been better against lefties in the last couple of years, and now all of a sudden you can put a guy like Edmundo Sosa into your lineup and he's crushing left-hand pitching this year. OPS like 1100 or something in that realm. Like all of a sudden that could be a deterrent for another team to sit there and go, well, we want to just keep throwing our lefties at the Phillies. Maybe you don't. And maybe that helps the Phillies lineup in spots where maybe they struggled in the past to have a guy like Sosa is doing as well as he's doing against left-hand pitching. So I think he could be a lowercase X factor moving forward.
Well, and when you think about some of the pitchers the Phillies could see in the playoffs, Chris Sale, Sean Manaea, Shota Imanaga, Clayton Kershaw, if he's healthy, like, could be a lot of lefties. There will be some games where Edmundo Sosa, if things go how they've been going, will start at second base. Quite frankly, I think he's maybe the best option to start at third base for the Phillies right now. So you're right. He has absolutely been tremendous to this point in the season. I do think he's someone that's better in like the sixth man type role, but there's been enough of a role for him this year to really make an impact while not playing every day. So a lot to consider. The Phillies are on a heater right now. 50 games through the season, 32 wins. They're in a very good spot. There's issues and question marks to work out, but I think the Phillies have set themselves up pretty well for the remainder of this season. That's going to do it for today's episode of Phillies Stoplight. I'm Tim Kelly, and he's Anthony SanFilippo. Check out everything on Patterson. Hope you have a great holiday weekend. We'll talk to you guys next time.